Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we welcome on the show Emma Thorne, who's going to share with us what it means to be an atheistic Satanist. So it's going to be a really interesting topic today. Before we get started, Michael does have a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show. It's going to be great to have Emma on. We've been looking forward to this one for a while. We've been having a few gremlins while we were setting up, so hopefully everything will work right from a tech point of view, but only so much you can do to guarantee against that stuff, and we're going to try our best. All right, so we've got some really great shows coming up next month as well, especially if you guys are into magic and all the esoteric stuff. We have Emma, we have our good friend Zulema coming back on to share some Valentine's love magic with us. And then we have Lon Milo Duquette, and he'll be talking about the Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot. And then we have Dan Moore, who will be doing a show on alchemy. So all kinds of really great stuff in February. And next week will be Krista's Spell It Out Magic and Reflections and Shadows. And I'm not sure what she'll be talking about, but she will let us know as we get closer. So get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And if you're watching the show and you enjoy it, then please consider buying us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It helps to cover some of our production expenses, and we appreciate that. And certainly subscribe to our channel. It's really just great having subscribers. And we love knowing you guys are enjoying the show, and we love all the great feedback that we get. So keep enjoying it. We're going to keep bringing you some great guests. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time because I really want to get into the topic. So I'm going to kick it back to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And welcome, Emma.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. We're very interested in this topic. And as one of our sort of desires as a show is to share real information about different spiritual paths, different magical paths, and so that people can become more aware about what it truly means to be on that path. So I really appreciate you coming on the show to talk about this.
Thank you. Yeah, it means a lot to get the opportunity to air it out and get some positivity going around Satanism. Yay.
So how did you first discover Satanism?
Well, I guess I sort of, honestly, it's more or less through the Bible, if that's not too contradictory a start. I started properly looking into it. I guess I already had the path as an atheist through my sort of childhood. And I've always been sort of interested in how that intersects with spirituality, because it feels like there's a disconnect between the two, but really they can coexist fine. And yeah, my dad was a staunch atheist all his life, and then he suddenly became a born-again Christian. And I took the Bible from the top because I wanted to understand. And I understand now why in school they give us the little book of Psalms and all the really nice bits and don't start from the beginning, because it's quite a read. And I couldn't, it just wasn't for me. I just couldn't get into it. I didn't have the feeling that people describe, the sort of spiritual understanding and togetherness when you read the book that you're sort of supposed to, and I was kind of hoping for. And I just started looking into alternatives and different paths. And at the time, the Satanic Temple was starting to be in the news a little bit more, and protesting a lot of issues that I care about, and was very pro-justice. And I thought that was really interesting, and I started to read into it, and it just ticked all of my boxes morally. And it's a very welcoming outcast kind of community, and is very supportive to those who You know, I just don't fit in the other boxes, but I want to be in a supportive community and engage in spirituality and, you know, tackle issues together. And yeah, it was just a really fabulous place for that. So that's kind of where I fell in.
So I definitely want to talk about the Satanic Temple, but before we go there, can you describe what it means for you to be an atheist too?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in the most basic sense of the word, I just have an absence of belief in a deity. So Satan for me in this case, and for most Satanists, is more of a sort of a spiritual figurehead. It's a metaphor for standing against tyranny, but it's also many consider sort of the power within a person. There's an idea in Satanism being your own personal god, and it doesn't mean in a theistic kind of way. It's more of a kind of spiritual, personal kind of way. So I don't believe, I have the absence of belief in any deity, and that's where the atheism comes in.
And so when you talk about Satan as an example, there are different views through history of Satan. And I realize that literature has done some of the worst with Dante and some of the things that they describe and made Satan into. So perhaps it'd be good for the audience to know what you mean by Satan.
Sure. Well, that's why I like to bring up that I sort of came through the Bible, because well, it's difficult because even biblically there's discussion over whether this character or not, the snake in the garden, for example. A lot of people think that it's Satan. It's never explicitly said. So even within the original kind of text that we're coming from, we're not sure whether Satan exists at that point. So I don't feel like there's a correct answer, more like it's sort of a matter of opinion, I guess. But Satan, for me, reading through the Bible, is the one who shows humanity to knowledge and truth and says, this is reality. And it's that there's a figure that exists that is demanding obedience and ignorance and praising ignorance. And then there is a figure that is open to truth and knowledge and experience. And that figure is Satan. So that's kind of, those are the respectable kind of, what's the word? Characteristics of Satan. It's about truth. It's about getting out of tyranny and, seeking knowledge and understanding.
So in my little brief research, I came across the idea of the word Satan coming through the Hebrew word for adversary. And then when I looked at the three Hebrew letters, they're all connected the way Aleister Crowley connects these letters to cards in his deck. And it was very interesting because it really puts a different slant on even the literal word of Satan coming from the Hebrew. And the three cards that they represented were the Judgment, the Strength card, and the Death card. And it was, I could see where, like all religions, there's much more complexity to even the simplest idea that we seem to go astray because you're taking the time to study it. You're looking into things and inquiring. And that to me seems to be very important for all spiritual paths.
Absolutely. Yeah. That openness to learning is really important, I think.
So you mentioned the Satanic Temple, I think it is. And
That's right.
I would love for you to share some of its tenets and its mission.
Sure. It's very, we've only got one chapter in the UK. It's mostly originated and based in the US. And that's sort of historically, I think, because of a bias towards Christianity, which I think is interesting. And I'm surprised it's not more of a thing in Britain because we technically have a religion. We don't have the separation of church and state that the US has. So I always found that very interesting. A lot of the mission is about effective protest. So there's the sort of resistance to Christian bias, particularly, but religious bias. And then the fundamentals of the actual tenets that we sort of subscribe to are just compassion. That's number one, compassion to all creatures. Struggle for justice is something that we should all strive for all the time. The bodily autonomy is a huge part of Satanism, especially in the Satanic Temple. So no one has the right to violate another person's body. Freedom, the importance of freedom of everyone, including the freedom to offend, which is, I guess, one of the more controversial ones. Beliefs should conform to unscientific understanding of the world. And part of this is not allowing beliefs to be distorted, but also being free to adapt to change. That's like quite fundamental. The final tenet, which is I think my favorite one, and why I feel a special connection to the Satanic Temple over maybe other organizations and religions, is that the tenets themselves are subject to your own spirit of compassion and wisdom, and that the spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. So whether there is a satanic text or something written by a prominent Satanist, if that contradicts with your own spirit of compassion, you shouldn't follow it. And that's how we avoid kind of the issues of dogma and things like that. So it's very justice and compassion driven, but without any fear of being critical. So everything deserves equal critique, but with compassion.
So it does seem like you get to be sort of your own boss on the path. You don't have to follow a particular person, a particular text or texts, and you get to decide for yourself if it actually makes sense.
It's very individual driven. I would say the Church of Satan even more so. It's very, especially if you're not in a chapter, then it's very personally driven. There are shared ideas and shared causes, and even things like rituals is very individual. So there's an idea of the purpose of self-love and standing up for justice, and then the temple provides examples and beneficial things to do, and then from that you can create your own. It is a very walk your own path. The whole sort of idea is of being the highest power in your own life, and so you're free to be a Satanist and disagree with satanic texts, for example. It's a very individualist kind of religion, I feel.
So earlier in the beginning of the show, you talked about wanting to belong to a community too. So because it's very individualistic, are there chances to meet as a community, either just to socialize or to do any kind of maybe larger rituals, like some groups will do like a spring ritual or summer or celebration of some kind? Do you have that in your path?
Yes and no. It's like I say, there's only one chapter in the UK. I think it's different probably based on where you live. But in terms of the online community, is quite strong and supportive. Yeah, it's just one of those things, small numbers scattered around. The community, the sense of community I feel when promoting like justice issues, because we do things through the Satanic Temple and support organizations and promote things, and then you get to enjoy the community aspect through talking about that. But opportunities to do things in person are unfortunately a little more limited.
So do you find online that people are very supportive of different kinds of people from different races? Are women equal in their minds? Because that has been probably one of the difficulties with some religions is not everyone is really equal from the very beginning.
Yeah. And I have a lot of understanding for this happening to every religion, because Satanism has had its bad apples that's brought the rep down. There's always, someone will always find a way to make it about this or that. Some of Anton LaVey's original writings lean a little towards not sort of supremacy, but a little bit of a survival of the fittest. Intelligent people should be with intelligent people to further the species. It kind of, those kind of things really contradict the tenets of the Satanic Temple and Satanism in general. But there is so much of a personal element to it that people will adapt it how they want. But the entire kind of point of being a Satanist is that it doesn't matter. You live your life. If you're not hurting anybody, you don't deserve any kind of hate or discrimination. It's fundamentally about equality and being kind to all people. It shouldn't matter any exterior factors.
I think anyone listening that doesn't have any knowledge of Satanism would be even amazed by the fact that you're saying that this is about not hurting people. It's about compassion and empathy. I mean, I personally didn't think that Satanists necessarily sacrificed babies, but I always kind of viewed it as a hedonistic kind of energy, that their orientation was more hedonistic and not, caring about people. And so to me, that is such an interesting awakening for me.
I have lots of thoughts, interesting thoughts on the topic of hedonism in Satanism, because it's such a, I feel like it's so much more subjective than the term is meant to be, because hedonism really is, I think it's the pursuit of pleasure, only the pursuit of pleasure, or the pursuit of pleasure above other things. Whereas Satanism, it's more, we should put, like I said, with one of the fundamental tenets is to pursue justice and to be compassionate. But if you're pursuing pleasure and you're not hurting anybody, you absolutely have the freedom to do so. And I think that freedom is kind of, there's definitely, also, I think partly because Satanism draws people who have grown up with certain religions and found them quite restrictive, or have not allowed them to live authentically. And what some people might see as hedonism is the sort of letting go of shame and rejecting the guilt over doing things that you shouldn't, in my opinion, you shouldn't feel any guilt over. I feel like the bar is always moving for what is shocking or unacceptable. It used to be an outrage for a woman to show her ankles.
That's true. That's amazing when you think of it.
Same-sex attracted, being in a relationship with somebody of a different race, and unless you genuinely believe particular texts are the word of a deity, then these things are sort of arbitrary. And I like the I like the idea of it being sort of hedonistic, in the sense that, yes, because there's no shame. That's what it is. There's no shame. We sort of reject that. And it's not just religious, it's also societal guilt that we have instilled upon us from such a young age. You grow up feeling like, I always think of the Simpsons bit with the nun. If you're happy and you know it, that's a sin. And,
I don't know that one.
The rejection of that. I wouldn't call it hedonism, but I can see why people would, because we're supposed to feel ashamed for doing things that aren't constructive and are just for our own pleasure.
We have a sort of comment question from Connie about this. She says, hedonism and compassion are not mutually exclusive then, as a question. And that's basically what you're saying, right? That they're not.
Yeah, I feel like by definition they are, but the way that people use hedonism to describe Satanism, no, they're not. If you take that pursuit of pleasure without shame as being hedonism, then you can definitely have that, and compassion, of course.
Well, in this way, it's very similar to sort of the spirit of witchcraft, in that you're allowed to celebrate everything that is human, including your sexuality, and pleasure is a legitimate pursuit. And that was one reason I got interested in just the concept of witchcraft too, because you're allowed to have human desires that are healthy desires that aren't, necessarily you're supposed to repress them because of religion.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's quite a lot of crossover, I find, in members who have also been interested in things like witchcraft. Lots of, oh gosh, I've forgotten her name now. The head of one of the chapters wrote a book, the name of which I've also forgotten. But she used to practice Buddhism, and she found that there was no conflict with what she was already practicing when she started joining Satanism. So I think it's interesting that you can kind of see those similarities there. But yeah, it's just purely that rejection of shame.
I think that's a very powerful observation, because shame really does underlie a lot of really critical issues in our lives, like women and their bodies is a good example. The shame that you're kind of made to feel on some level, even if you don't embrace it. I think that's a harder thing to sort of release too. It's because you can also like say, well, maybe shame is also being humble, or not putting yourself out or not being animalistic. So one of the other things that I sort of dislike about certain religions is the rejection of the animal nature, as if that's a bad thing. Then I think that's actually caused a problem, is we don't accept that we're animals, that's okay that we have an animal nature.
Oh yeah, I could not agree any more with you. Part of the sort of battle I had a conversation with a street preacher a while ago. Just I saw it waiting for a film to start in the cinema, and what else do you do in London? And part of the reason for his beliefs was that humans are just so different from animals, and I just feel like that's only true if you close yourself off to so much. Like I also feel, just tell me if I go off on a complete ridiculous tangent. Crows are my favorite because we keep learning things about crow brains, and crows are exhibiting self-awareness in studies that we're doing now, which is something that we thought wasn't possible due to the differences in the human and avian brains. And it's like we're finding out more and more that what we thought put humans up on such a sort of separate pedestal from the rest of the animal kingdom is actually not what we thought it was. And yeah, and so suppose something is, described as animalistic. Again, if it's not hurting anyone, it's only bringing people joy, who cares? That's my feeling. Plus, animals are great.
It's so true. And that's one of the figures, I guess, for Satan is Baphomet, is that one version of what people consider to be at least an archetype energy, if not a literal one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like part goat, or I never can figure out
Goat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that
That's
idea
right.
that I think that probably offends some people just for that reason. Whereas then you look at indigenous cultures that have always seen animals as being teachers and very wise, and so they'll take the name of the animal, or they'll be a clan, the wolf clan, and how beautiful that is. And also I think it's very helpful if you have that kind of connection that represents a part of you. But I think probably some people don't want to, those people that want to be above nature, that's offensive to them.
Yeah, and I think some of that is rooted in religious doctrine. I think some of it is just we've got still a ways to go in understanding how brains work, both human and animal. So, yeah.
And we're huge fans of crows too.
Yes.
they deserve it, and it's growing. The crowd is growing around the crow. You can see why too.
Absolutely.
So I was really interested in the fact that the Satanic Temple gets involved in activism, and I just went on their website and I saw that one of the things that they're involved with is this after-school Satan program. And I was really impressed by it, actually, and I know there's some other ones too. And I thought, well, that takes a lot of nerve to even call it that. But then can you talk a little bit about that particular program that they have?
Like I say, it's most of the advocacy that the Satanic Temple does is US based. So I'm not so familiar I was super involved and interested in the abortion rights cases.
Oh, right.
But After School Satan, I've read a little bit about it, and I think it's really interesting. It's, as I understand it, it's to teach children that rationalism and free thinking is kind of an option. I do think it's really interesting to do it under the name of Satanism because, like, I mean, we've talked briefly about the sort of controversy around even, you know, you hosting a Satanist or me being sort of open about it. And it's much easier to do something like that if you don't associate Satanism with it. And I think that's good for Satanism as well as good for kids. But yeah, I haven't looked too much into it, I'm afraid.
Well, it was just one of them. And so what was your involvement with the abortions rights?
Oh, just nothing more than sort of, again, kind of online advocacy and supporting the causes. Because again, it's specifically regarding when the laws changed, I think in the US, in some states, the sort of rules on reproductive rights and again, bodily autonomy is super important to me, but also a fundamental tenet. And yeah, I find it really upsetting that healthcare is still such a taboo kind of subject. And a lot of people who are, I've had conversations with people who are anti-abortion, and there's very much a kind of idea that, oh, it's an awful thing to go through and it's, you know, it's terrible to go through, so they shouldn't. And part of the reason it's so terrible is because in so many states there's information kind of provided along with that isn't necessarily warranted, that is religious and comes from religious places that, you know, aren't what the person believes in, but they are given this information anyway, and it's very it's super guilty and shamey, I would say, which is obviously very much anti my kind of style. So there was a push to protect women's reproductive rights based on the right to religious freedom, using the Satanic abortion ritual, which is not, as it sounds like a scary thing. It's pretty much just, again, like most of them, it's using a mirror to kind of console yourself and provide self-love and self-reflection. It's not, it sounds, to just say abortion ritual out loud, it sounds like much scarier than it is. But yeah, they do a lot of things like that I think are really important. It's sort of like a, you know, it's half to protest and to promote justice, and half actually to go out of their way to protect the members of the religion. And I think that's really cool.
So how do your friends and family feel about you being out as a Satanist, like talking about it openly? Are they concerned for you? Do they want you to change?
Mixed. Some of my friends think it's really cool. Some of my, I find that it tends to be, especially with like the video where I talked about it, it tends to be the people who have actually watched it and understood have gone, oh, I'm a Catholic and I'm relieved and I understand and I think this is interesting. People who just hear Satanism obviously have that kind of inbuilt aversion. And yeah, some of my family were concerned for me, worried that there would be repercussions. And I feel like, you know, talking about any kind of divisive topic is just, that's how it is. And I am enjoying living without censoring myself. And yeah, I don't know. It's been a somewhat controversial issue among older members of my family, friends. Either they think it's cool or they don't mind, or they don't engage with me on it. And I'm sort of okay with either. But it's definitely mixed. I think a lot of people say the kind of thing that I get is, why don't you just sort of have those beliefs without bringing Satan into it, you know? And it's like, I feel like it's a really simple answer, but it's like, well, this is a path for me to follow everything I morally agree with, but also I'm supporting an organization that does important work that I believe in. And it's as simple as that. It's definitely a
Well, it is interesting. It's a valid question. It may be also a way of reclaiming our shadow parts. And one of the things I was really impressed about when I researched the Satanic Temple was just the amount of information on one website that's historic. And like they talked about the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s. Now, I didn't even know that's what it was called. I mean, I do remember more people talking about ritual abuse and Satanism, but I didn't know it was a whole thing that ruined some people's lives.
Oh yeah.
And they're trying to find justice for that period. Very similar, maybe not as devastating as the witch hunts, but very similar thing happening to like scapegoating of a kind of people. So would you say using that word is kind of reclaiming the truth of it?
Definitely. And I think it's similar to reclaiming being a witch, or something similar. And I mean, the witch hunt is sort of a crossover with Satanism as well, because it was people were employing witchcraft because they follow the devil, and almost every historical instance of that is something that was created usually by the Catholic Church, but something that was created by opponents to make people who weren't even, they probably weren't even Satanists, let alone worshipping the devil. But yeah, part of it is definitely reclaiming that. I think also part of it is kind of not treating religion as something that we're not able to talk about. It's sort of saying, everything is valid for criticism, including religion, including mine, including yours. It doesn't get a pity pass for being, and I don't think any religion would really want that, because we only learn by having these conversations and debates. But yeah, there's something about reclaiming Satanism that is satisfying, and that's why when you see positivity around talking about it and people educating others and the after school groups and things, I think is really, really interesting. The more casual we are about Satan and God and religion, I feel like the more open people will be to talk about it as well, which I think just makes for a better world.
I agree, and I like to follow certain aspects of astrology, and I believe in the sort of the precession of the ages being valid. And I think that we're on the cusp still, I think, for another 100 years or so of the Aquarian age. And Aquarius is all about basically being yourself and breaking rules and innovation and a weird mix of individuality and brother and sisterhood. And I think that these groups that are sort of budding right now, that are getting like the Satanic Temple, are part of that energy of wanting to have that spirit, of that noble spirit of helping, but doing it my way.
Yeah, that's
a little
totally
sassy,
Yeah, I had somebody describe me, I think it was intended as an insult, but I actually really liked it, describe me as a humanist who's trying to be edgy. And I was like, that's exactly what it is.
That is a compliment.
The edge has purpose, but that's what it is. It's edgy humanism.
Well, it does catch your attention, and I would say probably also because of the truly unaddressed abuses in religion. They're being addressed a little bit more, but not fully. I think that's really discouraged a lot of people for wanting to be involved, even if there are good tenets within a religion. If the group is too toxic and they haven't acknowledged and changed things enough, then people want a different outlet. So you're having a fresh start, in a way, using some principles maybe that come ideally from religions, but that might appeal to some people too. There's no real baggage for you guys. Well, I mean, there's the historic baggage, but there's not the actual literal baggage of the church. And maybe it's easier sometimes to do that than to clean things up.
Yeah, there is kind of most of my experience with sort of mainstream religion is the Church of England, just because of where I live. And certainly there is a resistance to modernizing and updating, even things like the buildings, as well as the teachings. And I think possibly some people find it easier to start over because the process of trying to get things changed and updated is so slow. I'm just going to keep throwing weird comments out, but I had somebody suggest that the Satanic Temple, again, this was thrown as a negative, was plagiarizing LaVeyan Satanism. And I kind of thought, what a strange way to look at religion, because aren't all modern churches plagiarized? And that's if you're going to use plagiarized as the term. And what that person is considering plagiarizing is, I think, the natural evolution and adaptation of spirituality in people as we learn and grow, identify things that actually we don't really agree with those anymore. So we remove them and adapt and make something new.
All religions have different branches, and like Buddhism has like probably thousands at this point and they're quite different. Some of the tenets are quite different. So it would seem to me healthy to have more than one temple or church of Satan. It would be good for all of people involved in Satanism. So what are some of the differences, though, between the Church of Satan and like the Satanic Temple? Just a few.
Well, I mean, this is something I've been looking into a little more recently, because I think I had my own internal bias against the Church of Satan, which I think is it's kind of an interesting case study for me, because, I have to become self-aware enough to know that I've got my own bias against Satanism, which is quite funny. But the Church of Satan is possibly slightly more individualistic even than the Satanic Temple, because it doesn't have the sort of chapters and meetups sort of encouraged or regimented. It's more of what you would call a traditional church, I think. It's older, literally, as well as being, little things like paid membership and stuff like that. They don't do, in my experience, the church as an organization, less the members. They don't do so much advocacy and protests and things like that. But I've kind of come to see lately that because it is so very follow your own path, you can't really categorize it like that, because the individuals in it are following all these so many different paths that I feel sort of more guilty discussing the Church of Satan like that, because I know that it's not how a lot of the members practice, because it's sort of traditionally more closely based on LaVey's texts as well. Some of the ones that have been more sort of commonly rejected by the Satanic Temple. It's traditionally less of a varied reading list, but again, because it's so individualistic, people pick up those things by themselves. So it's a little bit of an older, more traditional kind of church, but it's so uniquely individual that I find it hard to categorize now and feel comfortable with the assumptions that I'm making.
That's interesting. So I know you covered this a little bit, but another person is asking, what does Satanism have to offer? What is the reason for becoming specifically a Satanist rather than, like, say, a Buddhist? Like, a Buddhist allows you to kind of be, at least certain Buddhists allows you to be your own master and follow yourself on that level, and believes in compassion and empathy. That's a big thing. So what would be the advantage of becoming a Satanist in your mind?
Geographically, it's probably more, more of a Western kind of belief system if you're here. But also, I think, like I sort of mentioned earlier, from a very kind of literal, basic perspective, if you agree with the sort of morals and tenets of Satanism, then supporting organizations that will protest specific things and helping fund, particular justice causes and keeping up with things like that. I think if you're in the US, it definitely has a lot to offer if you're someone who is very pro separation of church and state, because a lot of the activism around that is very important. I think I also just, obviously I'm somewhat biased, but I think it's a really nice community. It's very, like I said, it's very outcast welcoming. So you can have a conversation with most Satanists and completely disagree and be like, right on, brother, you know? So I just think I think it's a good organization if you are particularly outspoken about hypocrisy, especially of other religions. I think Satanism has loads to offer. Definitely for me, that shaking of guilt is something that's really important. I'm sure you can find other, organizations and spiritual paths that offer very similar things. It's just when it's right for you, it kind of clicks, you know?
Yeah, and I also liked what you talked about earlier in the beginning about no dogma, that idea that there really isn't a set dogma. And that seems to hurt even really good religions when it becomes dogmatic and doesn't allow for real debate and real growth. Now, again, my experience, at least of Tibetan Buddhism so far, is they encourage debate. There's this whole teaching that the monks have to learn to actually debate everything. And what I liked about Buddha's saying is that you want to test the teachings. So there are some that do, but there still becomes some dogma nevertheless. I'm not sure why. And so hopefully that won't happen in this version of Satanism. But that would be an appeal for people that are sort of tired of the dogma.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where someone can pull up something and say, well, I've read this story about Satanists sacrificing baby bunnies or something, and you have the power to say, well, a fundamental tenet is that if there is something out there that is written or spoken or some kind of traditional thing that happened that goes against the spirit of justice and compassion, I can overwrite that. That's the point. It's a powerful tool, and I do wish that more kind of religions would adopt that, the willingness to kind of adapt and update and be like, we definitely got that wrong. Let's modernize,
Like allowing women priests.
Exactly.
And in the day, maybe that wasn't really an important thing. And it is, where women are in different positions now without any kind of judgment about history. Just saying we've moved on, noticing we've moved on. And that was a question I had was, are there priests in the Satanic Temple? I think you said they're more in the Church of Satan is more traditional, right?
The Church of Satan is more traditional, but it is a bit more sort of individualistic. So I don't know whether there's the same kind of thing. There's less a leadership and more kind of people are the heads of local chapters. And so it's less that you look to them as a leader and they're more of an organizer of, your sort of local group. And then there's a core sort of team of people who set it up and do the activism and things. But there's no like figurehead. And I feel like that's quite important as well, because that's a very easy way to get attached to some quite negative ideas within religion and just groups in general, and I feel like we've got Satan as the metaphor for the power within, and then we're just individuals within the group rather than having some sort of hierarchy.
That is really actually quite fascinating. I don't know if it will last, because sometimes people will be made into figureheads if they write well, or like I know that happened in witchcraft somewhat, that even though witchcraft supports you, being your own witch and having like small groups, certain people became leaders, and then people kind of looked to them in a sort of like they know best. And that really comes down to us being responsible as human beings for, again, our own thinking and not putting anyone on a pedestal.
Yeah, and it's hard to do because we've always lived societally and in religions in that kind of structure where we have the people that are sort of higher positionally than us that we look to know better. It's something that is a challenge, I feel like, that we have to overcome, but it's beneficial if you do.
So in sort of maybe the historical Satan, you also sometimes have demons associated around Satan. Is that the case in Satanism, or is there just the one idea of Satan encompassing pretty much all of whatever it encompasses?
Hmm. Yeah, not for me. I feel pretty. I've got a skeptic's background as well, so I'm less inclined to think of things like that. But it's pretty much in the more sort of traditional, like I say, the Levian kind of texts and things. It's very much the what you would describe as the darkness. Satan as a representation of, in Christianity would be the representation of evil, would be the representation of that sort of personal power. So there's not really anything outside that. In my experience, like I said, very individualistic path. Maybe some people have a different experience to me.
So do you think that there might be a time where we evolve to a point where both God and Satan can be one in one tradition in some form? The reason I ask that is I do remember Joseph Campbell was talking about how we needed new myths. And I think we also probably are evolving our religions over, again, hundreds and hundreds of years, which I don't think it means these old religions are going away, but that there will be replacements of that work well with whatever we are at in our minds and consciousness. I'm wondering if they'll somehow come together in a unique way.
That would be the dream. I'm very, I think part of the reason that I'm very pro adaptation and updating in religions is because I think that's a kind of a fundamental human need almost, looking to spirituality. I don't see religions going away. My kind of opinion and outlook and my sort of dream is to be more open in discussion of different faiths and belief systems, because I feel, and this is probably more of a personal tangent again, but I feel that the history and science around spirituality is more supportive of spiritual things than people think. That sounds mad, so I'll try and explain myself. What I mean is, like, when you look at, say, historical Christian texts, and then you look at historical texts from other religions, you say, oh, these are extremely similar stories. I think it would be so wonderful to be able to talk openly about that and say, well, clearly this is either there was a person or there was a story that humans feel compelled to tell. We find this important throughout history. So we each must have a little piece of the puzzle. And if we bring them together, we could start to understand what is true and what is real so much better. And I think we can do that with science and religion and spirituality. And I think the only hurdle is that openness and openness to change, because the way that religions are sort of set up now, and I do think it's improving over time, but it's very, I believe this and this is my truth, and therefore these other stories are stories, irrelevant, whatever. And I just would love if we did kick down those walls in the future and start to bring things together and understand that maybe the similarities in our different beliefs are indication of something greater, and maybe they're not. But if we study them together, how much more quickly will we learn? That again is just sort of a personal thing. But it would be totally a dream of mine if we could sort of unite in a common ideology like that.
I love that, and I think that you're setting, you're opening a portal to that by talking in this way about Satanism. I mean, it's already changed my view of Satanism in a very short time. And I would say I was, growing up, one of these people very afraid of Satanists, even though I didn't grow up in a religious family. My parents, neither of them. But it was such a powerful movie and Hollywood idea that as a child, you just, think, oh my God, they're the worst. They do horrible things. And then, of course, as I get older, I probably just kind of dismissed some of those ideas, but I didn't really look into why it was so, or I'm not, especially when I got involved in Buddhism, they have wrathful deities. So, gives you a different perspective on what a wrathful anything can be, that there's something positive about it, and that we have it within us. So, but at the same time, I think that talking to you and listening to you, it does sort of make me rethink some of my prejudices. And I think, what do I believe and what do I think now? And I think what you're saying is very healthy, and that someday we could all dialogue from different traditions, and who knows what will come of it. Like you say, it could produce things we can't even imagine, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about having an open conversation before anything else.
Now, do you have any, you said you're sort of a skeptic too and an atheist, but do you have any practices that help you, to, for instance, being an activist of any kind, one needs to be able to handle your mind and your emotions, I think, to be effective. So do you do any particular practices, or is it just in your sort of ethics that you approach things?
Yeah, I guess both. Although, to be honest, many of my practices in that sort of sense come from, like a psychological aspect as well. I'm aware of my personal flaws. And so much of the kind of ritualistic aspect of Satanism is just about self-acceptance and teaching yourself to accept yourself and let go of guilt and shame. So in a sense, when I do things like, I make notes in a little mood diary, and then I sort of process that and whatever. And I'm in a way, I'm practicing in that sense, because I'm sort of engaging in ritualistic self-love. But it's a very personal thing. But I guess fundamentally, I'm always trying to adhere to the same ethics as well. And especially if I'm getting a bit frustrated with something, or I'm feeling like I can't be bothered to do this or that, and then I do think on the tenants, and I'm like, this is what I believe, and this is where my heart's at, and that kind of motivates me to behave in the way that I feel like I should.
And do you think that, according to your view of Satanism, it's a way of becoming the better version of yourself?
Oh yeah, I think that's a fundamental part just of the human experience. To be honest, I don't think I'll ever be my best self until that last second before myself is something else. I think the desire to be better should always motivate you. I don't even know if that's. I feel like I felt that pre-Satanism. I think that's just a personal thing.
Do you, and then on your path of talking to other Satanists, I know, for instance, in even Buddhism and witchcraft, there are people that are very eclectic, and they even practice other religions, and they're really okay with it, but sometimes they get sort of ostracized, particularly if a witch has any Christian inclination, they will sometimes be ostracized. So do you find there are other Satanists you've met that have other belief or religious systems that they feel comfortable doing with Satanism?
Yeah. I wish I could. I wonder if I can find the name of this author, who is, like I said, she's the head of. She's the leader of one of the chapters in the US, and she, like I said, she was always practicing Buddhism, and like I said, she never felt it contradictory, and she became a chapter leader, and it was completely unproblematic. I think part of the point of Satanism is to accept people from all different backgrounds and upbringings, and because there's no theistic aspect to it, it's hard to really have a contradiction there, because it's about practicing for yourself what is the best way to learn and grow for you. So I've not encountered any people who have had issues from also practicing other faiths. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember her name.
I could totally see Buddhism and Satanism going together, according to what the Satanic temple says Satanism is. Their precepts are very similar to Buddhism, with the compassion and ethics and the pursuit of noble things, I was really surprised. I said, well, I agreed with all the tenets. So it just goes to show one should really get to know, a group before you judge it in any case.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think, like I said, in my dream world, we combine all of these things to find again, not I don't think perfection is something, beyond our grasp, but I think combining beliefs that work for us is how you move forward into something that is more true and more interesting for you.
Well, tolerance to me has always been something I think that would improve the world. And I'm sort of in support of diversity, and nature supports diversity as being very healthy and healing. And so I'm sort of even against the concept we're all one. We are all one in diversity is how I see it. And if we can learn that diversity is interesting and helpful, like we do with food, think about all the great food out there, and we all, love the different foods. Why not with spirituality?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's an individual pursuit for truth, where you're the highest power in your own life. You're the one who makes the change, and if you do that by combining different spiritual paths, then more power to you.
But I was really interested in the fact that you're also calling yourself an atheist. So I do understand from what you've told me that, most Satanists are not theistic. And that's the same with Buddhism, though there is a little slight difference there. But I thought that was really, really almost delightful. I liked it. It was very intriguing. It made me want to know more about you and what that means for you. And so I just think it was very cool. Or is very cool.
Thank you. Those are the two that come up whenever there's a discussion of religions and theism being sort of mutually exclusive. People are always like, well, Buddhism, and it's like, Satanism, yeah. We exist too.
Yes. And I think that, we were talking earlier about how United States is supposedly more a separation of state and religion. Unfortunately, in reality, that has not been true in politics, particularly in the last 4 years. And I'm all for that I think that's very, very important, that our spiritual path is personal and doesn't have to be even shared. If a person doesn't want to share it, they don't have to tell people if they don't want to. There's no need for it. If you feel like you want to, great. If not, it doesn't make it any less.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of pressure on a person as well to kind of start imposing teachings on somebody if they're finding they don't believe them.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I got the impression from you is that it's not about trying to convert people into Satanism, which again, that at least certain groups believe that's part of their mission, is to convert, and they've actually forced themselves on others. So I like that. I like any group that is not trying to convert you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's about being open and understanding and providing a space for people if they want to come. But there's very much no there's no knocking on doors.
So we're pretty much getting close to the end of the show. Is there one quick last thing you'd like to say or share with our audience?
I would just say look it up, look into it. I think it's really interesting, and I think atheistic Satanism as well. If you're finding it difficult to get into and having an adverse reaction, I would say remember the atheist part and console yourself with the fact that we don't follow evil or worship an evil being, and then you can move on from there.
That alone, I think, will be very new to many people that have heard about Satanism, that you are not interested in evil at all.
Yes.
In that sense, you're trying to pursue it. But so anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Emma. We totally enjoyed it and hope you come back again.
Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful.
And I want to thank all of you for listening in again. And we look forward to next week as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great, interesting week.